right, great. So let me now start to talk about the advantages of a need-driven faction system. So while that sounds a little bit dry, I actually was asked by Ronnie to put in some nice pictures, so you will see something like that, some in between. But let's quickly start. So what am I going to talk about? First, I'm going to introduce who we are actually as a company and as the team that I'm working with. I will give you a quick introduction into the concepts of the technology. And then I go into the specifics of our faction and attraction system. And at the end, we should have around 10 minutes for Q&A time. So first of all, who are we? Ubisoft Blue Byte. So we are the I'm from the Düsseldorf studio of Ubisoft. And Blue Byte is a little bit more than 25-year-old developer in Germany. We are well known for the Annus and the Settlers series. So we actually just received 2 weeks ago, did we? Yes. We released Anno 1800, a strategy game that probably most of you guys know. Not that well known is that we do actually co-work on titles with other Ubisoft studios. So we are working as well with the Rainbow Six team from Montreal. And at the same time we work with Montpellier on Beyond Good and Evil 2 and some other projects there as well. So about me, I'm a senior producer. I'm in the games industry since 1995, where I actually started as a programmer. And then at sometimes I moved into production. So I'm now since about, I think, 20 years working as a producer with a more technical background. And I joined Ubisoft in 2013, first working on the mobile version of Anno. And well, in the last years, I actually switched to a more technical project. I'm now working with a small team. We are 10 people in Düsseldorf. And we are working on a project which is dealing with the procedural generation of game content. The project we are doing is subsidized by the EU as well as by the local state of where our studio resides in. And it's a 2-year research project that we are collaborating with together with the University of Applied Science from Cologne. They have their own games department. And we have now working for about 2 years actually with them on all the kind of aspects of procedural generation that there basically is. From our side, we are working in Snowdrop, which is the studio engine we use at Blue Byte. It's originally developed by our sister studio Malmö, by Massive. And it's one that we kind of use right now for all the upcoming titles that we're working on. And the technique that we do, or the technology that we're working on, is more of a research technology, but so far some parts of that technology have made it into production projects. Since both of these production projects are not announced yet, we cannot really show stuff from there, so that's why you will not see that many really nice pictures from me, but I hope that the information is good as well. So, all right, let's talk about the philosophy that is behind the technology that we did. So we wanted to do a biome-based approach into procedural generation. It's nothing really new, but I think it is something that is a very logical step. Basically simulating a world in the aspects that we have, then separating the world into basic biome types, and then giving our designers the ability to take these biomes into smaller subunits, which we call ecosystems, and really basically put the meat of a world into these ecosystems. It makes full sense, which you will see later on, because then you can take all the aspects of the simulation that you started out with and then use it further down the road to feed all different kind of other systems. We want to do a full procedural generation. So basically, let's say something like a wizard or something like that, where you would do several steps to basically create a world from scratch up to really to the little details. And while it was important for us that we had something to basically go all the way, we're working in modules so that projects that just wanted to take certain steps of our generation would be able to do so. I said before, we are used in 2 game productions right now, and one of them uses, I would say, roughly 90% of the technology that we have provided, while the other one probably just around 30. So these things stand on their own and can do specific tasks if needed too. Another important thing was that we have a believable technology. all the first samples that we created were there to basically simulate planet Earth as it is. But as some teams that we talked to wanted to create non-Earth-like worlds and something more alien, everything is basically working so parameterized that we can change things, and if you want to have 2 suns or something like that, then our simulation can take care of that. And the last thing is that the creation that we do will stay basically true to the rule set that we fitted it with. That means that if we come up with a rule set to create something, just change the seeds or something like that, recreate, the learnings that a player has made when he played through the world for the very first time still need to be valid. All the things that he experienced when playing there should still be true in the newly generated world, while the look and the feel and the areas, of course, that he's now experiencing and exploring should be different. So that was kind of important to us when we started out. So I will now go quickly basically over the steps for what kind of simulation models we use, because it's more important, it's getting important in the later parts of the presentation. So this is nothing we really developed. It's something that's out there since quite a few years, but I think it's a good starting point. So we started out by segmenting our world into areas. These areas, which are later going to be biomes, can have any shape that we want and can have basically any size actually as well. Most of the samples that we are using either use the hex grid or the what we call hex relaxes, what you see on the right side, and probably for game design purposes a good size is something like 100-150 meter size of these areas, but if you want to, you could go smaller and bigger. We then create a height map, and that can be created by several ways. We can just take random noise. You can load a pre-painted height map or one that you exported out of a tool that you have. One of the Paris studios actually wrote an exporter, so you can just go to Bing Maps, choose a map area, and it will automatically import the height map from that map area in here. So basically whatever you like to do, you can go wild with that. Then you add a temperature. So this is just a representation of a standard temperature map like it would be on Earth, where the poles are on the side, the coldest areas, high mountains are cold areas, and in the middle the equator is where the sun would be going, or one sun would be going, so it's the warm area. We're adding rivers and water bodies, which we need for our further calculation. We have a very simple wind system. Actually, we have several wind systems, but this one is a very simple one that we use just for the calculation of our biome weather. And based on all that, we can actually create a precipitation map that takes into account the water bodies that we had before, and at the same time it will use evaporation, transpiration, and also orographic effects like clouds raining off in front of mountains before they pass over that. And with all that information, we basically distribute 11 basic biome types into the world. And that's now actually where then the real kind of work starts, because we start out and we have now a basic biome type, and depending on rule sets, we are distributing this into the various ecosystems. Now these ecosystems are going to be the amount of ecosystems we have for one of these basic biome types will be dependent on where the game you want to basically create is going to play most. So just as an example, let's say we have the temperate basic biome type, which is the same as we have around here. And just to simplify the set of rules, let's say we want to deal with if one of our ecosystems is next to an ocean ecosystem or to water. One of the many things we could take into consideration would be the slope. So let's say we set up rules for 3 different slopeness types of this ecosystem, and we have something which is not steep at all, something which is a bit steep, and something that is very. We could actually distribute in 3 different ecosystems here, something like beach, dunes, or cliffs. That system can be taken further and further and further, and actually supports an iterative approach by actually generating more and more different ecosystem types for the areas where your player is going to play most in, and by doing that you will actually create something that is looking different and will actually make the world look more versatile and interesting in these areas. Now each of these ecosystems is for us basically a template. So these have different properties. The very simplest one is the generation parameters for our detailed height map. The height map you saw in the beginning is actually not the one that is being sent to the terrain system. In here we create basically the terrain in detail using a height map and some terrain generation filters. We implemented a technology called Work Creator 2. A few of you guys may know it. And that gives us quite a good choice to actually on how to create the various terrains for the specific ecosystem. After doing that, we decide what kind of flora gets actually scattered in this area, which then becomes important later on. We clutter various objects to make things look a bit nice. We define what kind of materials are actually placed in our ecosystem here. The next thing is we decide how we transition from one ecosystem to the other one. For some games, what kind of resources we are going to actually put here. So specifically if we work on a, let's say, strategy title, it could be interesting to scatter a certain amount of resources here. Then gameplay objects, let's say we want to do, I don't know, a role-playing game and want to scatter the mage tower somewhere. We can do this. It's actually called landmarks now in our project. Then we have rules dealing with special dealings for that ecosystem if it may come up. So all that kind of thing is at the moment being done as node graph in Snowdrop. And then last but not least, we can actually take care of ambient effects like global illumination, specific sound effects, specific music handling for that to make people basically, to give a better feeling for an ecosystem if it's better that. Okay, so now actually it's the point where we can talk about the faction system finally. When we created the world, so let's say this is our basic biome map now, or actually our ecosystem map here. We started out and wanted to basically automatically have life in this. So what we did is we first basically define a faction. And for that we actually implemented something XML style where we set several parameters which are important for every faction that we have. So basically we talk about the impact that they will have in the world. We talk about what kind of ecosystems they are going to like to live in. We basically also come up with a need for certain resources which are in the world. We come up with the elevation of where they like to live. So you could have a faction living in the mountains and another one in the lower regions. If they like to settle more on the slope or if they like to settle in land, which is flat. What kind of settlement they are going to build. Are they rather going to build small settlements or are they going to build large cities? And last but not least, what type of roads are they going to build and how likely they actually are going to build roads. So low-tech faction would actually build roads which are easy and basically following the way that nature grants you, while a more high-tech and more optimized faction will build tunnels, will build bridges and stuff like that to get very direct connections between 2 points. And now with all the various influences we have, we basically create now a attraction map for each of the factions. And so everything can be an attractor for us, plants because it may be a food source or may be used for something else. Animal factions, which are factions on their own that are just handled a bit different. So they're also usually a food source for the more human factions, or could be also a resource for, like, horses could be used as riding animals or something like that. Proximity to other factions, they may like or may not like another faction, so they will maybe settle close or even very far away from them. Water is usually a very good need for any kind of factions. We can differentiate here between fresh water or salt water, or maybe it doesn't matter to them, they just would like water. We could use specific weather conditions, special geographic properties that they like to settle next to mountain walls or whatever. And basically anything that we can put in the world or have put in the world so far can serve as an attractor for us. And by actually putting this into a heat map, we kind of come up with hotspots, which are for us the possible spawning point for settlements. And at the same time, we connect these hotspots, and you see this here, the red dots are actually the hotspots, the blue line is actually a river, and the red lines, which are passing along the river and such, they are potential roads which can be carved in the world according to the road settings of that faction. And so yes, they are connected and then can be roads. And there's also a way of actually editing these and manually overriding them to fit whatever needs you may have. So let's talk about the factions. I'll give you an example. We have the world I showed you before. And the first faction I'm going to place, or the system is going to place here, is our Amazons. So Amazons like lakes, they like rivers, they like the rainforest ecosystem. That's why you see that they are settling in the light greenish ecosystem. And they build low technology roads. So you see the two easy connectable points are connected. The very other one over there not, because that would be probably too complicated for that. Take just as an example our Vikings. Vikings like it more cold, they like it more moist, and they build more independent settlements which are very far away from each other and which are placed in large flat areas. On top of that, we have a basically faction we call the Voyagers. And Voyagers like to basically settle at the coast, and you see that the little yellow dots are the Voyager settlements. So they actually rather build a lot of small settlements than a few larger ones. They did that. They're avid road builders. They have connected not just the settlements, but they even built like more over-regional highway-style ways. And they are freshwater dependent. That's why their points, even though if they are at the coast, will usually build where there is also a freshwater source, like a river or something like that, present close by. So you see that by just using the different needs for these factions, these are, I hope you can see them because they're really, I think, really hard to see in that light. These are the different attraction maps for that faction, and so it's going to be, they're going to be spread out in the world based on these needs. Now, how does that actually work for further systems? Well, if we take any kind of resource, I will just take iron now here for as an example. So let's say we have the resource of iron, and that would be for me a resource that I can use to feed an NAC, let's say a miner or a blacksmith, that kind of type. Now, that NSC needs to spawn somewhere, so I think about either putting that guy in a mine or in a smeltery or in a smithy. And then I actually can create quests based on exact these, on the location and on the NSC type. And by having the resources combined to that, I already can kind of choose what type of quest I would like to generate for that. So I could do deliver resources quest, I could create items, or I could even do something where, yes, a blacksmith asks me, bring me 5 iron, I will forge you a sword or something like that, or the typical FedEx quest that we know from other games. And I can actually evolve that if I want to come back to the settlements now and say, okay, if I have a place where I spawn a very small settlement, the next thing actually I could evolve into either a little mining town or into a larger city, which actually consists of a lot of people. So evolving these settlements into something basically works in steps. We kind of identified that if we deal with settlements, let's say up to the industrialization age, we basically have 3 different settlement types here that are important and that are need to be treated differently if you want to procedurally create them. So you have the smallest one, which is a small village. It's just a very few buildings close to each other. It's usually actually built by having one or very few function buildings. From the example we had before, basically a mine or something like this. And maybe there's a few auxiliary buildings around that, so meaning some living quarters and maybe a tavern or something. The next step, and you will need to handle it differently if you want to procedurally create that, would be a town. specifically in the pre-industrialization ages, smaller towns usually had some kind of meaning driving it. So staying with our mining idea, probably you would have a mine, you would have something, some blacksmithing business and stuff like that going on. So usually a town followed a purpose. And then the city is something which grows over larger times, needs to be created differently again. Here you have a larger area. The parts of that city are not so compartmentalized anymore. And because everything is growing and changing, also the setup will be a lot more mixed up as it was in the little town area, because in these town areas you usually had very strict separation of the different areas. Like if you have a leather working town, if you treat leather, I think historically people that were treating leather were put in a very specific part of the city because it was a smelly process, so you don't want to have that smell all over the town. That's why you put them in some own district. So this is basically it all fed together and based on the resource iron. So if you have resource iron, it would be the very initial function would be just a mine. To support the mine, as explained before, you have something like a tavern, you have housing in that village. So at some point it will grow. So you will actually have some more crafts on here. You will have shelter, you have smithies, you have an armor or something like that. Everybody has his own district, is basically working on products that the other people generate for them. And well, the auxiliary housing around you is very limited to something people need to basically fulfill their daily needs. And then in the largest area that there is, we have big cities which have influenced or which have grown, which have included a lot more people from different crafts. And so the older the city grows, the less specific, let's say, resource-driven it will be. It will be having regular business and trading areas and things like that. Okay, now we have a city and we have some NSCs that could have some meaning in there. So let's see how we can actually generate some quest out of that. So basically, if you look at the composition of a quest system that is fed procedurally, you work with several type of properties and basically objects. So we basically have the property of a resource available, iron, wood, whatever. To that we have our faction definitions, and know that certain factions may need another certain resource or that resource. And we have an NSC definition. Our NSC may need a specific resource, is able to convert the specific resource, or can do specific things with this resource. These all three together allow me to actually spawn that NSC and have him actually live in our world and basically accept certain items, convert them to certain other items, or just actually take items off the player and give him some kind of reward for that. So now I just need to see where do I actually spawn one, because that was not really done by the stuff that we have seen here. So we have two ways. So we either actually create a landmark for him to spawn at. So this would be more something if I want to basically push some kind of storyline procedurally and say, okay, I will create a landmark, which could be, let's say, the easiest thing. It could be in the middle of a forest. I could create the landmark of a campfire with maybe some tent or something like that set up. And there's a hunter type of NSC next to it, asking you to bring in wood for a bow or whatever. Then I would create the landmark and then the NSC there. The other one would be that I've actually created some kind of settlement, as said before, and then I actually can put a structure there to place my NSC. So that would be, let's say, the I put a swordsmith in one of in our town, and gives the player the ability, if he brings me some very specific steel or iron or whatever, to craft that oversword for him. And this systems actually, once created, then feed into quest into actually dialogue generation for the quests. And which is a whole other deal where you can basically use some player modeling example maybe to take the stuff that you have spawned and actually steer and control the player in these certain areas by modeling what he was doing. Yeah, we are thinking of a system where we actually can apply the learnings we can make from the player living in our game world to how to apply this to the quest to make it more interesting. So I could use that, for example, to control a player to go into certain areas of the world. If I see that a player is just omitting a part of my world for whatever reason, but I also know that he's, I don't know, maybe a vivid archer in the game, using bows and stuff like that quite a lot, I can use that information to actually maybe create an archery tournament or something like that in that part of the world and actually lure him there. And that's basically how it all comes together. So, what are now the advantages of doing basically a procedurally driven system where the needs actually define the NSCs, the locations we create, and at the end of the day, if we really fulfill the full circle, doing quest and dialogue creation procedurally. So first of all, my economy is going to be believable because it is working in the world. It's an example, one of the things that people really admire about Anno. They really like that in Anno you can really see how the economy works. You really see the lumberjack taking the wood and bringing it to the sawmill transferring it to wood, and then some carpenter building stuff out of it. So people kind of like that in a world, and if they even experience it like firsthand, it makes the world just so much more believable and interesting. Then the wares and goods fit the local ecosystem. You will basically not deal with anything that just doesn't feel right. If you're in the middle of the desert, you will not deal with somebody that is asking you for basically getting lumber or something like that, because there just isn't any. If you do it smart, your simulation will feed all the systems for you. So I think the good idea about doing a procedural game creation or content creation is that you have a system up and running where you basically have all the systems feed automatically each other, so that if you change one thing in the world, the systems will basically catch up automatically and regenerate the rest for you in a believable way, so that you don't have to check everything down the road if it still is basically working as you intended it to be. And which is already the next point. So then quest will also fit the local theme. If you creating, let's say, come back to the woodcutter town, if you create a quest there and it's a quest about getting wood and doing wood related things, it just feels right. It would feel strange if I run around in a mining town and if somebody asked me to bring lumber or something like that. So you can make sure if you do that, your players have still the right feeling of where they are and will fit in the world. And as already hinted towards, if you do actually combine this with player modeling, it's a great way to actually make sure that the player is going into the world where you want him to. And this is also some experience that you can really feel. I think this morning there was a talk about how if you procedurally create an end boss can be maybe not as interesting as you create it manually, if you model out what the player really fears and give him an end boss that he really fears. May be nasty, but it is probably something that is rememberable for the player. Just as an idea. Okay, and that's basically concluding it actually. So if you have any questions, you actually can go up on our website or can just drop me an email. And yeah, I think we now have some time for questions.